a debate about randomness.
I am very hard-pressed to think of any real thing that's actually random. I understand functional randomness, but I am begging anybody to name something that is actually random. Grains of sand in the wind are influenced to move in very specific directions by minute changes in air pressure. Every single molecule of water in the ocean and the sky is directly influenced by everything around them.
Make a very symmetrical hill and place a ball on the very top of it, then watch it roll off. Can you predict which side of the hill the ball will roll down?
This is very hypothetical. In that perfectly symmetrical hypothetical situation, the ball would simply balance. The only way it wouldn't would be through some kind of variable influence.
Let's say I blindfold you and flip a fair coin. The coin is now on the ground. I ask you what the probability that it landed on heads is. What would you respond? Sure, the coin's trajectory is determined by the forces I applied to it, its initial position and velocity, its shape. But do you know any of those? Can you look at the coin? How is true random different from functionally random? Can we even distinguish one from the other?
This is a very interesting take, but it implies somewhere in that physical reality is entirely dependent on one's perception of it. Let's say I blindfold you, flip a coin, and then kill you before taking the blindfold off. Schrodinger's box is never opened, but in the reality that exists outside of your diminished perception of it, it's only going to be heads or tails. You being dead doesn't change that. Every living thing in the universe could die right at that moment, and the outcome of that coin toss wouldn't change. True random is something in the physical world that has happened with absolutely no outside influences. My understanding is that this is impossible, but that is apparently a statement of faith. Functionally random is something that has so many variables that an outcome would be too complex to predict, such as having somebody code a computer to pick a random number. It looks random, and you don't get how it works, but it absolutely follows rules.
The problem here is that we don't have a solid reason to believe that we can predict everything with enough information. The idea that we can build models based on data and improve them over time is like saying the future will always be like the past, which is not a reliable basis. Thinking that we could predict everything perfectly if we had all the information is not logical, but more like a matter of faith. When we encounter complex systems that can't be predicted, believers in this idea might say that although we can't predict them now, it's still possible based on an untestable theory. In this perspective, things labeled as functionally random are basically things we can't predict due to limited data or the absence of suitable models. For example, a ball balanced momentarily at the top of a hill might be called functionally random because we don't have complete information about things like air currents, temperature, or seismic activity. But getting that level of knowledge is almost impossible, except in imaginary, all-knowing beings.
I'm not trying to talk about any gods or any other omniscient beings. I'm specifically interested in talking about macro-scale events that are too complex to measure in any meaningful way, but with properly accounted for variables could be theoretically calculated and replicated on a computer, for instance, such as the spread of a shotgun shell being fired into moving water. Not to be rude, but I think pointing at an incomplete field of study and stating, "We don't understand this, so you can't say it isn't random," seems to me to be somewhat of a null point in this discussion.
I'm not sure if there's a definitive argument that settles this question. It seems like you're referring to determinism, the idea that everything in the universe, including our actions, is predetermined by the unchanging laws of nature. This perspective suggests that free will is just an illusion. There are strong arguments in favor of determinism. However, this view also makes certain assumptions. I'm not an expert debater or a physics professional, but I've heard that there are arguments against determinism. Some physicists argue that while determinism logically follows from classical physics, the actual science can be counterintuitive. Quantum interactions, for instance, appear to be purely probabilistic. We don't yet know if there's a deterministic mechanism underlying these actions.
Another aspect I'd like to add: what's the point of calling a grain of sand in a windstorm deterministic when it is impossible to determine its trajectory with current technology, and when it will probably remain impossible for the next century? Our universe could be deterministic, but we would never be able to tell because in order to simulate all the atoms in the universe, we need more atoms than all the atoms in the universe. So for all intents and purposes, that grain of sand's deterministic qualities are so out of reach that it's just random.
Functionally random. If something so blatantly random is actually deterministic, then absolutely everything that isn't on the quantum level is completely deterministic and has been since the beginning of the universe. Hence why you're reading this whenever you get round to it.
Yeah, my point is, why dwell on something where we will never be able to tell?
Since you've gone out of your way to post this idea, was the idea pulled from randomness? Or was there deep thought that went into creating this post? Some say thoughts just come to us out of thin air, more precisely randomness. Then there is the idea that we have never actually created ideas, but that ideas have us, that the collection of all thoughts and values have been processed through us and we output the end result. There is a small problem with this hypothesis. If we didn't originate ideas to begin, where did they come from? This leads us to the foundation of religious beliefs, where people choose to believe that the world we live in is not random. Life is a scary thing if it's entirely random, being unsure about the purpose, what's most valuable, what brought us here, and what to expect looking forward. Some think religion is a way for us to relieve ourselves of that randomness. I think those people are too prideful to admit their fear. Until humanity ceases to go on, this will always be a debate for generations to come.